Hi everyone, my name is Ivy Rotger and I'm a second grade teacher. And throughout this course, I learned that motivation is actually a lot more complicated than simply just wanting to put your mind to do something. I think as teachers, we often hear from our students things like, I can't do this, or I'm bad at math, or this is boring. And before taking this class, I tended to view some of those comments I would hear as maybe just a lack of effort from my kids or a lack of motivation. But after getting a chance to study some of these theories and actually apply them in my own life, I learned that motivation is often influenced by how people think about their abilities and how much value they see in a task and how they explain their successes and failures. And today, I want to share what I learned and provide some practical strategies that teachers can use to increase student motivation. So, I know I'm going to be taking a lot of this back to my classroom this fall, so I hope you can learn something today. So, without further ado, here are lessons learned from motivation psychology in the elementary classroom. So, why does motivation Oop. Why motivation even matters. As teachers, I know for me at least, I feel like sometimes I can have this amazing lesson prepared, but if my students aren't motivated, learning just becomes so much more difficult. Motivation really influences whether my kids participate or how hard they work at something, or just how long they're able to persist through a challenge, and even how they feel about themselves as young learners. So, throughout my first year teaching second grade, I quickly realized that many of my students were actually very capable of success, but their motivation often determined whether they actually reached that success. So my motivation experiences for my applications for the project, I chose two situations from my personal life that I thought were very fitting for each theory. So the first one involved motivating my husband to complete this large attic storage project that we had had on our plates for a while. And then the second involved motivating my mom to begin running again after years of believing that she was just too old to run. So while these situations seem unrelated to education, they actually really help me understand motivation in ways that I know I can directly apply to my students. So the first theory that I'm talking about is the expectancy value theory. So, according to Wakefield, motivation is influenced by individuals' expectations for success and the value that they assign to the task. And in some of Dr. Jones's videos, he reinforces this by emphasizing that motivation increases when people believe that they can succeed and see relevance in the task. So the first theory I applied was the expectancy value theory. And according to that theory, motivation depends on whether someone believes that they can succeed and whether they see value in the task. And at the same time, you also have to take into account perceived cost, such as, the effort or the stress or the time, and all of that can reduce motivation. So putting it in simple terms, people are more motivated when they believe they can do something and when they believe that it's worth doing. One thing that I really appreciate about this value is that it doesn't just assume people are lazy. Because with my husband's example that I'll get into later, that's an easy thing to just assume. Hey, the boxes aren't moving anywhere. You're just being lazy. It doesn't assume that. Instead, it asks, why? Why is he not motivated to do this? It's because he doesn't think he'll succeed? Is it because the task isn't meaningful to him? Or does it simply feel like it's just too much? Is it too overwhelming? So that shift in thinking, I think, really changed the way that I approach both adults and how I'll approach my students in the future. So here is the story of our attic project. So my husband, he did want to complete this project, but it just was one of those things that continually kept getting pushed aside. Other things that seemed maybe more important would come up, And here we go. We've been in the house since November. It's June, and my garage is still full. So, through the lens of the expectancy value theory, I realized that the issue wasn't a lack of desire. The project just simply felt really overwhelming compared to all the other projects going on at work, all the other house projects we've been doing. It is a lot. So, to increase expectancy, I broke the project into smaller tasks. And to increase the value, I had conversation with him emphasizing, all the extra space we could have if our garage was cleaned out and stuff was in the attic. And then also we've been dreaming about having a home gym. Well, there you go. We just move it to the garage if all this stuff could go in the attic. It allows us to park in the garage, all the things. And to reduce cost, I went to Home Depot and I purchased the organizer that he had been eyeballing for a while. So the supplies that we were able to build the organizer so I could go ahead and beforehand start kind of putting things in the rack for him. So after these changes, he was able to go ahead and complete the project in one weekend. So even better than what I thought when I was breaking it into smaller steps. So this brings us to strategy number one that I will be taking into my classroom, increase student expectancy. I recommend increasing students' expectancy for success because students need to believe that they can be successful before they're willing to invest effort. In my classroom, I think this is going to look like breaking larger assignments into pieces that are just more manageable for them and providing examples and making sure to celebrate progress when students experience small success, their confidence is going to grow. My second strategy is to increase task value. Increasing task value is going to be important because I feel like students constantly ask, why do I need to learn this? What's the point behind this? And so when students understand the purpose behind an activity, their motivation increases. So in my classroom, I really try to connect lessons to my students' lives, things that I know about them. I'm big on relationships, so things that I know, hey, they're really interested in this. Let me try to tweak this lesson to fit their interest or something that's a future goal for them. So when students see relevance, they become more engaged. The next theory that I worked on was the attribution theory. So the theory focuses on how people explain their successes and failures. These explanations really shape future motivation. So if people believe failure is caused by something fixed and uncontrollable, their motivation often is going to decrease. One thing that really stood out to me is that two students can receive like the exact same grade and respond completely differently. One student might think, oh, I need to study differently next time around. And another student might think, I'm just not smart. I'm just not smart. That was not the grade I wanted. So the outcome is the same grade, but the explanation that they created in their mind really determines what they do next. So that's why this attribution theory is so powerful. So here is my mom's running story. So, my mom had convinced herself that age was the reason that she could no longer run. According to the attribution theory, she viewed age as something that was internal, stable, and uncontrollable. So, because that she believed that this was so permanent, she saw little reason to try. And yes, I do understand, age can be permanent, but my job was to motivate her. So I'm going in and working with her on focusing on other factors that she can control, such as some of her training habits, or maybe her consistency or her pacing, maybe not starting out so fast and just taking it in smaller chunks. So after playing around with this theory and spending time with my mom, that brings me to strategy number three that I'm taking into the classroom with me, which is reframing student thinking. So, this experience with my mom immediately reminded me of my students and just the comments that I frequently hear in the room, like, oh, I'm bad at reading or I'm not good at math. And these statements aren't necessarily laziness or lack of effort. They really do reflect this same type of thinking that my mom demonstrated. So As teachers, I think that we can help students reframe those beliefs and focus on their growth and effort and strategies. So connecting it to a growth mindset, which is this idea that connects, so students who believe their abilities can improve, they're more likely to persist through challenges. So rather than, just viewing mistakes as, oh, this is evidence that I'm a failure, they view them as instead an opportunity to learn and to grow. So strategy number 4 that I'm bringing into the classroom is focus on feedback and effort and strategy. So that is going to be one of my biggest changes is how I provide feedback to my kids. So instead of focusing on their intelligence level, I'm focusing on the effort they're putting into things, their ability to persist through challenges, and their ability to use strategies. So this helps students understand that success comes from actions that they can control. Next, I want to talk about how we can support diverse learners. So, motivation strategies are important for all of our kids, but they are especially important for diverse learners. So, different students are going to face different barriers to motivation in the classroom. And by increasing expectancy, increasing value, and helping students develop healthier beliefs about learning, we can better meet the needs of all of our learners. So here is what I call my motivation toolkit. And I think if I could leave anything for educators in this video, it would be these 4 practical strategies. These approaches are supported by motivation research and are strategies that I think are going to be really strong to implement in the classroom. One thing that I want to continue to provide with my students is more choices whenever possible, because I think choice is going to increase autonomy and interest. And I also want to spend more time explaining why we're learning something instead of assuming students just automatically understand that it's important. Sorry, this is me. I'm talking about how I will change my instruction. So these are some ways giving students more choices, explaining why learning matters, continuing to be intentional about the feedback I get instead of saying like you're so smart. I want students to hear more things like, hey, I noticed you tried a different strategy, or hey, I noticed that you kept working even when it was really difficult. And then I just want to help my students better rethink failure. So instead of viewing mistakes as maybe like proof that they're not able to do something, I want them to see mistakes as this is just part of learning. This is every day. This is how we get better. This is how we grow. So my major takeaways are motivation, it's not laziness, your beliefs matter, value matters, and small changes make a big difference. So I expected this course to mostly be about getting students to just work harder, but instead I found myself really reflecting on my own motivation and the motivation of the people that are closest to me. And I realized that it's not something that we simply just have or we don't have. It's something that changes depending on our beliefs about ourselves, the situation, our experiences, the things going on around us. And I think as an educator, we influence all of those things every day. And that realization really changes how I view my students' behavior. Motivation problems are not really motivation problems at all. I think they're actually belief problems. And when people believe that they can succeed and they see value in a task, I think motivation just naturally increases. So, as an educator, I think we really have tremendous influence over those beliefs. And so, this is kind of my final thought as a takeaway from what I learned. When students say that I can't, they're usually telling us something about their beliefs and not their abilities. So, thank you guys for listening. I really hope that these theories and strategies are able to encourage you to think differently about your motivation practices in your classroom. And maybe the next time a student says, I can't, you'd consider what belief that may be driving them to be saying something like that. So by helping students see their value and believe in their abilities and focus on their growth, we can help them become more motivated, and then we'll have successful learners.